Well, welcome everyone to our next Charter Ed Talk with Matt Person, who is managing Charter School Capital's financial analysis and risk.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
That's the
Can
team.
you tell me a little bit about what you do?
Sure.
I mean, like what that means.
Sure. So simply put, what our team's responsible for is mainly understanding how much funding our clients could need, and then trying to actually map out a plan of what they need and what we can provide. So it's a cohesive relationship for us. And then the other thing we're doing is actually valuing what we're going to buy. So we're valuing the future revenue streams. We're looking at purchasing from the school for financing, as well as for our real estate business, figuring out what schools can afford. So helping schools map that out.
Oh, so you do actually work with the schools a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's cool. Because I have a feeling a lot of schools don't have people with your experience on staff. Is that correct?
Sometimes it's nice if they have some kind of back office provider. We have someone we can dialogue with, but sometimes we take a more active approach with our schools that don't. So it's helpful.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, so there's a couple of different types of schools that we work with here. Startup schools and then kind of a little bit more mature or growth-oriented schools. Can you tell me a little bit about the differences between the approach for financial support for each?
Sure. I would say probably the three things that are that we could emphasize for a startup school versus a growth or a mature school is flexibility.
Okay.
And then variability, and then kind of the power and efficiency you have as a school.
So can you tell me a little bit about what is flexibility versus variability?
Sure. So if we say variability for a startup school, you're actually a lot more variable in the sense of you don't have any history yet.
Oh, right.
So you have no backlog to figure out how last year worked out. So everything, you have to be a lot more adaptive to what happens.
Okay.
Because you might say, hey, we think on our petition budget, we're going to open up with 100 kids. But you may open up with 125 or 75. So then figuring out how to quickly adapt your budget and adjust accordingly, you just have to be a lot more reactive as a startup school.
So all the planning in the world, you still have to kind of be nimble.
Right.
And you help with that.
Exactly.
Okay.
And
that's
then,
cool.
If you're a growing school or a school that's been mature or been around for 5 years, 3 years, somewhere in that realm, you have a baseline and you knew how things happened last year. And you have less variability in your student count. Because if you established yourself in the market, you have, the students around that come to your school and they may, continue on in your school. So you have a lot more understanding of what your baseline is going to look like for future years.
So you're more predictable. Oh, that's very cool. Okay.
Yeah. So then the other things I talked about was the flexibility. So the flexibility, or sometimes you could think of it as the power you have as a school, and if we can use that word.
I like that word.
So if you're a startup school, once again, you just have to be more flexible.
Yeah.
You aren't flexible yourself yet. You just have to become more flexible.
Okay.
So that could mean adjustments up front, changes down the line. It's really all about reaction, like we said before.
So are we managing like expenses more than we're managing revenues at this point?
It's definitely both.
Okay.
But I think everything starts with your student count,
Yeah.
which is what leads to your revenue.
Right.
And then you have to adjust expenses accordingly.
So it's as important to keep happy students as it is to bring them in.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Cool. Very cool.
And then obviously if you're a mature or a growing school, the power you have is that you have established relationships with your vendors, the people that supply your technology or your books or your landlord. You have a relationship with them. If you have any challenging months or times of the year, you have the ability to use that relationship and utilize it for your advantage. And maybe say, hey, in the first 3 months of the year, my revenue, my cash is tight. Can I push out maybe some expenses till later in the year? And you have that type of power up front for your vendor management.
Love that idea of power around vendors. And do you find that vendors oftentimes will respond to that?
Definitely.
Really?
I think the key is always communication up front.
Okay.
It's like anything in life, right? If you give someone the forewarning with enough time, the relationship's a lot easier to maintain and establish.
So flexibility when you start, then you become more dependable and have, your variable expenses are more predictable and you establish yourself as a a reliable partner to others, and you have more power as you
Right.
grow up. And the key to all that is your student revenue should exceed your expenses.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Very
That's
much
great.
so.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Can you, I know cash flow planning is a big consideration for a lot of schools. Can you talk about how that affects your budget? You talked a little bit about it before, but can you dig into a little bit about what should charter leaders look out for when they're planning their cash
Sure.
flow?
I think the key is that sometimes cash flow planning gets overlooked.
Ah,
Everyone knows that for any business, which a charter school is, you have to have a budget, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes people forget to look at things from the actual ins and outs perspective, which is what a cash flow is. A cash flow is essentially your budget, but it's broken out usually looking 12 months ahead.
Mm-hmm.
So you can figure out how everything looks monthly or sometimes even weekly. So then you can start to figure out, really the questions you want to ask yourself are, what are my challenging times of the year?
Okay.
Because if you figure out where your challenging times of the years are, then you can use everything we just spoke about, your vendor management and all your accounts payable management, and you can forecast that up front. And then it starts the conversations with your vendors, and if you have to look for financing, you know when you might need it. So basically the cash flow is helpful because it gets you looking and becoming more proactive in the future.
And tools for managing cash flow or resources for managing cash flow, those are people like your back office provider.
Mhm.
What if you don't have one? Does that mean Charter School Capital helps you if you're working with us?
We
or-
do that all the time for
You
our
do?
clients. Yeah.
Okay.
Even if
Okay.
they do have a back office provider, sometimes it's a relationship. We work in tandem with the back office.
Okay.
It's usually a partnership is how we always, work on that type of thing.
Yeah, because I don't know that a lot of schools have, well, maybe they do, but it's been our experience, I think, that they don't have as much visibility as they should oftentimes, right,
Mhm.
into cash flow.
I agree. I
Yeah.
think sometimes it just gets overlooked. So
Yeah.
highlighting the fact that it's a very important tool for many reasons. It's important to look at.
Very cool.
Mhm.
Good. So if a charter leader is looking for new financial support for a
Mhm.
school, what should they be who should they be looking at? What are the steps that they should be taking?
That's a good question. I think what you want to start with is figuring out how much you need, right?
Okay.
So in order to do that, I would say you probably need the same document we just referred to, which is the cash flow. Because
Okay.
then you can start to figure out if there's some type of gap in your cash flow where you don't have enough actual cash in the system to pay something important, rent or some big bill that's coming up.
Right.
Then you actually know. So I would say you first want to establish how much you need,
Mhm.
and then with that, when you need it.
And do we help with that? Does Charter School Capital help with that, even if you're not doing business with us yet?
We do.
You do?
We do.
Okay.
I think schools generally know, hey, we think we're going to have problems with cash, but they might not be as honed in on exactly how much they need and
Mhm.
when,
Mm-hmm.
and then kind of in the future how whatever financing they do is going to affect them. So we try and help show them the path, always, in advance. We like to look at things, pretty far in advance, 6 months, 12 months,
Okay.
to help schools map out, kind of where they can go and what they want to achieve.
Very cool.
Mhm.
Very cool. Any last recommendations or advice for charter leaders from your seat, from where you sit?
That's a good question. I would say it kind of relates to what we just spoke about, but it can be applied to anything. I think the biggest baseline driver for everything, as we talked about, is student count.
Mm.
But it's very easy to know student count and how much you get paid for the year. But it's more important to understand when those students come on board, when does the actual receipt of the revenue come for those students? Because oftentimes, all across the United States where there are charters, there's some lag from when new students come versus when the actual payment for them comes.
Mm.
It could be 3 months, it could be 9 months. So then you have to figure out, as you add new students, how you pay all the onboarding costs for new teachers and new books for those students. So if you have that mapped out, it sets everything else off much better.
Matt, thank you so much. We really appreciate your help today.
Of course.
And for more information on budget planning and tips and things like that, Charter School Capital has a whole bunch of resources on the website. charterschoolcapital.org. So come visit us and find out more. And if you have a real question, I'll bet Matt might help you out.